We've all heard about the awakening of consciousness, and perhaps some of us are experiencing that profound shift right now. This state brings a new understanding of life, where the veil of illusions begins to fall and the truth about how reality functions becomes increasingly evident. However, few speak of the dark side of this process. Embarking on the journey of self-knowledge is not merely a simple walk toward the light. It's often a challenging expedition through the shadows. When we decide to awaken, we aren't just ascending to a life of perpetual bliss. Awakening means opening doors to parts of ourselves that we have long hidden or ignored. Opening ourselves to full consciousness is akin to opening a portal where not only light but also shadow eagerly awaits us. Behind every profound insight, there lies a hidden layer of ourselves. And behind every transformative revelation, there's a side we consciously avoid looking at. In this exploration, we will delve into this often forgotten and uncomfortable side of awakening, and crucially, why it's absolutely essential to embrace it. Understanding the dark side of this journey isn't about fleeing from the truth. It's about fully embracing the human experience in its glorious and complex entirety. The myth of problem-free awakening. There's an idea, almost a pervasive myth, that the awakening of consciousness acts like a magic spell, instantly solving all our problems. It's often presented as the promise of a full life, completely free from suffering, a state of uninterrupted peace where we finally find our true selves. For many, awakening seems like a place of ultimate rest and relief, where the pains and struggles of the world can no longer reach us. But this is the first trap of awakening, and it's as subtle as it is powerful. This kind of thinking leads us to believe that we simply need to reach a certain frequency or achieve a specific state of enlightenment for all our difficulties to magically dissolve. It's an enticing, almost seductive view, one that promises immediate relief and inadvertently transforms awakening into a product to be consumed in the relentless pursuit of instant peace. The truth, however, is far more nuanced. Awakening is less about escaping pain and more about learning to see pain with new eyes. It's less about completely eliminating problems and more about profoundly learning to coexist with them in their raw essence, without fleeing or ignoring their presence. This often marks the first point of disillusionment for many, the stark realization that awakening doesn't remove the fundamental human condition. It doesn't erase our imperfections, persistent doubts, or deep-seated anxieties. On the contrary, it frequently amplifies our perception of them. True spirituality offers no shortcuts. It unequivocally demands confrontation, not avoidance. And confronting oneself is inherently painful because it forces us to squarely face what we have deliberately ignored, meticulously hidden, or deeply repressed over many years. Facing the ego. The first hurdle upon embarking on the journey of awakening, one of the very first and most significant challenges we encounter is the ego. This intricate structure of identity we have meticulously built throughout our lives is a complex and sophisticated construction that inherently dislikes being challenged, much less being deconstructed. When someone approaches awakening expecting it to somehow exalt or elevate their own perceived importance, they invariably encounter an abyss of profound frustration. This is because true awakening does not nourish the ego. Instead, it reveals it in all its inherent fragility. The ego clings fiercely to alluring ideas such as "I am special," "I am evolving," or "I am above the illusions." In this context, the spiritual journey risks becoming just another elaborate form of personal glorification. However, genuine awakening does not grant a status of superiority. It demands a deep and profound surrender. It reveals to us that we are not special, distinct beings separate from the grand whole, but rather only a small, humble wave in the vast, boundless ocean of existence. The illusion of awakening as a title that elevates us above others dissolves completely, and the individual finds themselves in a position of authentic humility before the immense vastness of the universe. The painful process of disillusionment and shadow integration. There is an inevitable and often profoundly painful disillusionment that accompanies true awakening. This disillusionment is a raw and necessary process. It is as if the mind, which has for so long clung to ingrained beliefs, perceived absolute truths, and external solutions, begins to systematically undo these very foundations. Disillusionment is, at its core, a process of deep cleansing, i.e., shedding of all the limiting beliefs we've created about life and, crucially, about ourselves. And this profound cleansing is, for the most part, deeply uncomfortable because it fundamentally takes away our familiar ground, leaving us feeling vulnerable and exposed. When consciousness expands, it inevitably illuminates our internal shadows, the vast collection of everything we have repressed, meticulously hidden, or vehemently denied about ourselves. Most of us instinctively prefer to ignore this uncomfortable part, striving to maintain an idealized image of the spiritual self. But inevitably, sooner or later, the shadow manifests its presence, and there is simply no way to proceed on this journey without squarely facing it. The shadow is formed by everything we instinctively avoid seeing in ourselves. Character traits we deem unacceptable, emotions we consider shameful, and painful memories we bury deep within. It is what we repress because it doesn't fit the meticulously crafted image we have created for ourselves. What many often forget is that by trying to ignore these parts, they don't simply disappear. On the contrary, they remain latent, actively working in our unconscious mind and profoundly influencing our choices, our relationships, and our overall view of the world. Facing the shadow means coming into direct contact with aspects that may be disturbing, but which are also incredibly powerful. More importantly, the shadow holds valuable parts of our vital energy, or chai. Unconsciously, you expend a significant portion of this vital energy keeping your skeletons in the closet. And in the long run, this can lead to terrible consequences for your well-being and growth. Many mistakenly believe that shadow work is just a mere complement to the spiritual journey. However, facing the dark side is, in fact, the very path itself. When we dive into the shadow, we often find traits that strikingly contradict our cultivated self-image: envy, jealousy, resentment, arrogance, insecurity. It is profoundly painful to realize that no matter how much we have striven to be good or spiritual, we still carry these deep-seated emotions and impulses. This is the pivotal moment when we confront the self we thought we had overcome. That uncomfortable side we didn't want to acknowledge still undeniably exists within us. The shadow often manifests most clearly in our relationships. Each person we encounter, especially those who trigger strong emotional reactions in us, whether it's anger, fear, or even a disproportionate attraction, is in some way a mirror of our own shadow. What genuinely bothers or fascinates us in others is often an aspect of our own personality that we have ignored or vehemently rejected. This phenomenon is what Carl Jung aptly termed projection, where our repressed traits and feelings are unconsciously projected onto others. By realizing that what bothers us in others actually belongs to us, we can powerfully use our relationships as a path to deeper self-knowledge, thereby reducing the tendency to blame others for what in reality resides within us. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean indiscriminately embracing harmful behaviors, but rather accepting that these traits and emotions are an inherent part of our wholeness. When we resist the shadow, it paradoxically strengthens, maintaining subtle control over us. But by courageously recognizing and accepting it, it loses its insidious power over our psyche. Jung famously stated that the process of individuation, the profound search for self-knowledge, and the integration of the personality is the true path to wholeness and genuine transformation. Facing the shadow sets us truly free, because what we recognize loses its ability to dominate us. Aspects like anger or fear, when deeply understood, become powerful tools for self-knowledge. Anger, for example, can teach us about our fundamental boundaries, while fear can illuminate the profound value of courage. This process also makes us far more compassionate with others, as we begin to see their shadows without judgment, knowing that everyone possesses unspoken and hidden parts. Transcending the ego, a path of humility and vigilance on the journey of awakening. The ego consistently reveals itself as a frequent obstacle. It is, in a sense, a mask meticulously created to protect our perceived identity and relentlessly reinforce our sense of importance. At the same time, the ego is also the insidious source of deep internal conflicts. Our mind, accustomed to constructing a solid and stable image of who we are, inherently tends to resist the profound transformations that awakening inevitably brings. This resistance is entirely natural, but to move beyond it, we need to understand precisely how the ego functions and why it reacts with so much fear and control to the very idea of its own dissolution. The ego is the undeniable center of our identity, a complex structure that meticulously maintains our beliefs, desires, and the self-image we've painstakingly built over time. It is singularly responsible for making us feel distinct, separate from the rest of the world, and it is precisely this perceived separation that ultimately becomes a significant obstacle on the spiritual path. The ego cunningly creates an illusory sense of permanence, constantly trying to convince us that we are definitively defined by our fleeting thoughts and personal stories. Throughout life, the ego relentlessly strengthens through experiences and the inherent need for protection. It clings desperately to labels, triumphs, and even perceived failures, constantly seeking affirmation of its self-worth. Thus, any genuine attempt at transcendence, any subtle sign that our identity is not as solid as it seems, generates intense internal resistance. The ego inherently fears dissolution because it views awakening as a direct threat of symbolic death. For the ego, losing its cherished certainties and rigid definitions is akin to losing its very existence. This primal fear generates enormous internal resistance. When confronted with the profound invitation to expand consciousness, the ego often responds with a barrage of defensive thoughts and emotions: fear, doubt, anger. It's as if it fiercely fights to maintain control, to desperately avoid being absorbed by something far greater than itself. This profound internal struggle is vividly described in various spiritual traditions. Jesus, when saying that we must lose our life to gain it, unequivocally refers to the crucial need to abandon the alluring illusions of the ego to discover and find true life. Losing the self does not signify annihilation, but rather a profound opening to a new, expansive way of living. Some people mistakenly believe that merging with God or the light means losing individuality. But it is precisely the opposite. It means expanding this consciousness to encompass the entire boundless universe. Speaking in terms of vibration and energy, when two waves are perfectly aligned in frequency and phase, they create constructive interference. The energy of both waves combines, resulting in a wave of significantly greater amplitude. The ego, in its relentless quest for control, even attempts to cunningly appropriate the spiritual journey itself. It often wears the deceiving mask of enlightenment, meticulously creating the illusion that it has already reached a higher spiritual state. In his insightful book, The Myth of Freedom and the Way of Meditation, Chogyam Trungpa profoundly explains that this false spirituality is merely an attempt by the ego to protect itself, cunningly transforming genuine spirituality into a mere title, an achievement, rather than an authentic journey of detachment. This pervasive phenomenon is clearly seen when the ego creates a holy image, becoming rigidly attached to ideas of superiority and deceptively believing itself to be more evolved than others. By doing so, it skillfully avoids the real, challenging, inner work and substitutes true awakening with a superficial role, a performance. This dangerous trap of enlightenment is a subtle yet incredibly powerful diversion that can paralyze genuine spiritual growth and keep the individual tragically trapped in an endless cycle of illusion. The only authentic way to transcend the ego is through constant vigilance and profound humility. We must diligently observe our own thoughts and attitudes closely, consistently questioning the underlying motivations behind our actions. This rigorous exercise in self-awareness effectively prevents the ego from taking insidious control of our precious spiritual journey. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, wisely states that self-knowledge profoundly leads to humility. For the more we truly know our own weaknesses, the less we feel the need to exalt ourselves. This transformative practice, highly recommended in various spiritual traditions, consists of observing our thoughts and emotions without becoming emotionally involved or entangled with them. By diligently doing this, we gradually begin to realize that the ego is not our true essence. This profound disidentification is a crucial and liberating step, for it weakens the ego's tenacious hold and brings us significantly closer to a purer and more genuine experience of reality. A silent, alert presence allows us to experience life in its absolute fullness, completely free from the insidious limitations imposed by the ego. The dark night of the soul and the practice of spiritual humility. The spiritual journey is by no means a linear path full of unwavering light and serene tranquility. More often, it reveals itself as a profound crossing through a deep and shadowy abyss, a challenging process famously known as the dark night of the soul. This potent concept, originating from the profound writings of St. John of the Cross, vividly describes a state of profound spiritual and emotional crisis where everything seems utterly lost, and the very meaning of life itself becomes obscured by an impenetrable fog. This significant chapter in the spiritual journey invites us to courageously explore this painful yet undeniably transformative experience. The dark night of the soul is not merely a negative or destructive experience. It is, in fact, a necessary and purifying phase for profound spiritual growth. During this intense stage, the individual may feel an overwhelming sense of existential helplessness, a profound loss of purpose, and a chilling absence of connection with the sacred. What once seemed a well-lit and clear path now appears to fade into obscurity, leading to deep introspection and a fundamental questioning of one's entire life and long-held beliefs. Thomas More, in his insightful book Care of the Soul, eloquently explains that this phase is an urgent invitation to strip away the illusions we have meticulously built about ourselves and about life, thus preparing us for a new and much deeper understanding of the sacred. The intense crisis that typically characterizes the dark night of the soul is often accompanied by an acute sense of loneliness and profound disconnection. As Paulo Coelho so beautifully points out in The Alchemist, this darkness is frequently a necessary passage for us to truly discover our own inner light. The pain and confusion serve as powerful catalysts that force us to confront previously unrecognized truths and courageously abandon the limiting beliefs that have kept us imprisoned. This arduous process can be aptly compared to a profound metamorphosis. Just as the caterpillar undergoes a complete transformation into a beautiful butterfly after a period of darkness and solitude within its cocoon, we too can undergo a profound inner transformation by accepting and bravely traversing this challenging abyss. The deep pain of the dark night of the soul can ultimately lead us to a spiritual rebirth, where a new, expansive vision of ourselves and the world emerges, purified and invigorated. One of the key elements to successfully crossing the dark night of the soul is acceptance. Carl Jung wisely asserted that what we resist persists, while what we accept can transform. During this intense period of pain and confusion, resistance only serves to prolong the suffering. When we consciously accept the difficult situation we find ourselves in, allowing ourselves to fully feel all the tumultuous emotions that arise, we begin to create necessary space for profound transformation. Accepting the dark night as an integral part of our spiritual journey allows us to release the need for control, and in doing so, surprisingly find a lighter, more navigable path through the dense darkness. This process can lead to a profound clarity that once seemed utterly unattainable. The invaluable lessons learned during the darkness meticulously prepare us for a more authentic and deeply fulfilling life, one that is more truly aligned with who we genuinely are. Emerging from the dark night does not mean that the pain has magically disappeared, but rather that we have learned to carry our experiences more lightly, finding a renewed sense of purpose and deeper meaning in life. In the relentless quest for a higher state of consciousness and profound clarity, it is remarkably easy to fall into the insidious trap of spiritual superiority. As we deepen our spiritual practices and expand our knowledge, the ego can subtly transform these profound experiences into a false sense of grandeur. Hidden pride can silently infiltrate our being, leading us to deceptively believe that we are somehow above others. Enlightenment is often mistakenly idealized as the absolute pinnacle of spirituality, but this very pursuit can quickly devolve into a sterile competition. Osho, in his insightful book, The Revolution of Consciousness, profoundly emphasizes that when enlightenment becomes merely a matter of status, we invariably move away from its true, sacred purpose. The ego then begins to seek external validation through perceived spiritual achievements, leading to the erroneous belief that we are on a higher level of development compared to others. Brené Brown, in her transformative book, The Gifts of Imperfection, brilliantly describes pride as a misguided attempt to protect our inherent vulnerabilities. When we feel insecure about our intrinsic worth, we may instinctively cling to a false sense of superiority to compensate for these deep-seated uncertainties. This defensive mechanism can manifest in various detrimental ways, such as belittling others or developing a critical, judgmental attitude toward those who do not follow the same spiritual path. This self-defeating behavior not only pushes others away, but also tragically prevents us from truly seeing and appreciating the richness of diverse human experiences. By unconsciously placing a barrier between ourselves and others, we forfeit the invaluable opportunity to learn from the vast diversity of paths and perspectives. True spirituality should always be an invitation to inclusion, where the unique experiences of all are valued, not a competitive race to see who possesses more knowledge or understanding. As we deepen our spiritual journey, we risk isolating ourselves within a self-created spiritual bubble. Jack Cornfield, in A Path with Heart, wisely observes that excessive introspection can inadvertently distance us from the world and from authentic human interactions. We become so intensely focused on our own personal growth that we lose empathy and genuine connection with others. This harmful disconnection can foster a sense of superiority, where we begin to view the world through a dualistic lens. Those who have not awakened versus those who are on the right path. This duality is not only harmful but also counterproductive, as it perpetuates the destructive idea of separation and continually feeds hidden pride. Genuine spirituality, therefore, fundamentally requires humility. And humility is not about devaluing oneself, but about profoundly redirecting our focus outward, rather than solely concentrating on our own individual experiences. Humility helps us recognize that the spiritual journey is a shared, collective experience where we are all continually learning and growing together, and each one of us is navigating our own unique struggles and challenges. True spirituality is most authentically revealed in the selfless practice of service and compassion. The ego can easily distort the spiritual pursuit, cunningly leading us to believe that our knowledge or practice places us on a pedestal. However, true enlightenment is not about being perceived as superior, but rather about the willing readiness to serve others. When we begin to perceive spirituality as a profound means of helping and supporting others, we naturally move away from the constricting superiority mindset. Serving others then becomes a powerful reflection of our own awakening, a precious opportunity to deeply connect with humanity and to actively create an expansive network of genuine compassion. Awakening to consciousness is not about reaching a definitive, fixed state of ultimate light, but about opening ourselves to perceive and embrace all the intricate nuances of the human experience. Those who bravely embark on this journey must be prepared to face their shadows, their inherent pain, and the intricate illusions they have meticulously created about themselves. The undeniable truth is that awakening is an endless, evolving journey where, with each step we take, we encounter new layers of ourselves to be unveiled, understood, and ultimately integrated. The dark side of awakening is, in fact, an essential and utterly indispensable part of the entire process. It is precisely within this darkness that we truly discover our authentic strength and our profound capacity to love not only the radiant light, but also the inevitable, yet equally valuable shadow within and around us. Thank you for watching.